Te ora koutou katoa, ko John Reid toko ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Te Wara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid, part of Water New Zealand's climate change group, and with me is group member Hannah Edmond and guests Lisa Ehrenfried and Simon Prunster, both of whom are from Yarra Valley Water in Melbourne, Victoria. Kia ora, Hannah, Lisa and Simon.
Kia ora, John.
Good afternoon.
Hello, John. Hello, Hannah.
I would also like to, before we start, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we are speaking here in near Melbourne. It's the Wurundjeri people and their elders past and present. I have the deepest respect for how they looked after this land, air and water for time immemorial and how they learned to thrive in harmony with nature. It's something that we're aspiring to in our work.
And that's a great way to start. Thanks, Lisa. As we think about climate change in the world that we live in, we've had several podcasts on this subject, and we've been trying to unpack some of the key issues that we, the water sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand, needs to tackle if we're to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So over the episodes we've had before, we've been discussing the journey and context of carbon emissions targets, the importance of developing a baseline, forecasting, and some examples of what different water companies have been doing. In our last episode, we talked to David Riley about what Anglian Water in the UK has been doing. So today we're really interested to find out more from some of our colleagues who are a little close to home. Now, Lisa's leading the environment and community resilience team at Yarra Valley Water. So there she's driving the integration of climate resilience in our asset management practices and reviewing climate resilience planning. She also leads the work translating the circular economy strategy into action, working closely with the asset delivery teams and planners. Simon is head of energy and emissions for Yarra Valley Water, with a broad focus on energy management, energy efficiency, renewable projects, and emission reduction activities. So he really focuses on scope 1 and 2 emissions and is working with the cross-functional environment team to develop and implement the emerging scope 3 strategy. So thanks to both of them for being with us today. Just a little bit about Yarra Valley Water. So they currently serve 2 million people in Melbourne. They're one of the 3 retail organisations there, and that's about 800,000 residential properties and almost 60,000 business customers.
It's great to have you both here, and it's awesome to be able to hear about some of the experiences over the Tasman in Australia. I wondered whether, just to start us off today, you could share some of the journey that you guys have been on at Yarra Valley. And maybe in particular, Lisa, could you give us a bit of a historic review on what journey you've been on around the emissions reduction and the environmental ambitions that you guys have got?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the last 50 years, there's really been an interesting journey that Yarra Valley Water or the water sector in Victoria more broadly has been on. Before the 1970s, it was really just down to self-regulation. No one was really controlling it, but then the EPA came in, of course, then, you were then complying with the EPA targets. We then moved to aspiring to be net carbon neutral, then carbon neutral, and also generating all the energy that we use. And now currently our ambition is really to become a regenerative business, which aims to leaving the nature in a better state that we found it as. We also, in the mid 2000s, we asked our customers if it was important and if they were also prepared to pay for us to offset our emissions. And yes, customers told us, yes, we would be okay with paying for more than was the bare minimum required, which is really an interesting step. Then also another in the past, in again the mid 2000s, we mapped both the water and the energy that we supply to and use in our water supply zones. And that really highlighted again the connection between water and energy use. And we then from that identified certain water supply zones where it would be actually quite cost effective for us to replace the shower heads with the low flow shower heads. That's areas where we have to do a lot of pumping to provide the water to. So if the customers who live there use less water in their showers, then we have to do less pumping. So again, it's highlighted the water energy nexus. But now that's all things of the past, and now we actually have a fantastic plan to move beyond zero carbon in 2025. And Simon is really the man who drives that work, and I'm sure he's happy to talk to that more.
I'd love to. And before I start, I'd like to think of my role here at Yarra Valley Water and Lisa's role here at Yarra Valley Water. We're here for a moment in time. Our businesses have been operating for many years before we got here, and they'll operate many years after we leave. So we're just stewards, really. So we want to make contributions to the business that leave it in a better place than where we found it. And I think that's common for a lot of the people who work in our environment team. So what do we do in this space? To ensure that we contribute to a common goal of continuous improvement, we look to develop and implement strategies that guide us through each decade. Our current 2030 strategy is built on three foundational pillars of customers, community, and the environment. And our strategy informs our policies, ambitions, targets, initiatives, and programs. In practice, we identify the projects that will deliver on the strategic objectives and drivers, and all expenditure must be linked back to the strategic drivers. So in practice, every dollar we spend must be traced back to our 2030 strategy. And sticking to this mantra is fundamental for us delivering what matters. Beyond zero carbon, which is the strategy that I've developed and lead, exists in our environmental pillar. It's our strategic approach to Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We employ the principles of the emissions hierarchy to prioritise our efforts with the intention to reduce both cost and emissions. Our mantra is to make good economic decisions that lead to enhanced environmental outcomes. Our first order priority is to deliver on energy productivity to optimise our energy consumption. We think that 10% of our baseline emissions can be addressed under this step. Secondly, renewables are now the cheapest form of energy, but integrating them into our energy portfolio from either behind the meter or green supply from the grid can require complex solutions. We will transfer to 100% renewable electricity in 2025 to eliminate our Scope 2 emissions, but we're currently exploring opportunities to move faster. 80% of our baseline emissions are Scope 2. So we're a retailer. We basically take the water supply, deliver it to the customers, and then we take the sewer away. We only treat a fraction of that. Melbourne Water, as the wholesaler, treats the majority of that. So our fugitive emissions profile is smaller than most corporations. So most of our energy is consumed in electric motors from pumping water to customers and electric motors in taking them away from customers. And so when we're looking at renewables, we think that about 80% of our footprint can be addressed through switching to renewables. And we've got some major projects that we're doing in this space. And we're also helping others by supporting some large-scale renewable ventures in Victoria. So that covers kind of 90% of our footprint, leaving us with the small section, which is actually quite hard to abate and almost considered unavoidable with the technologies that we're currently using. We understand that while we can't necessarily influence these today, in the future we'll look to improvements when we upgrade treatment plants and new technologies become available. But in the meantime, we do recognise that there is some harm to the environment that's caused through these. So we seek to balance the ledger by making investments and direct investments in carbon reduction activities here in Victoria. So we're not looking to buy our way out of trouble. We're not looking to go and invest in schemes of dubious credibility. We're actually physically involved with projects that are here in Victoria that make a real that mean something, that have other attributes and benefits beyond the carbon reduction, and it's tangible and it's happening right here.
That's pretty awesome to hear in terms of that growth that you've had over the time and in your knowledge and experience around all of this as well, and how you're applying that. It's aiming for the stars, but you also have that realistic gap which everybody's working towards, trying to minimize as much as possible. It's good to hear, and also interesting because you've got that unique portfolio, which is maybe slightly different to some of the other utility owners where they do have that wastewater side as well. But that's meant your focus on what you do have and what you are facing. And I guess the one bit we've not touched on in terms of the journeys that you've been on so far is around those Scope 3 emissions from construction. that kind of starts to bring the whole picture in, doesn't it? Because I guess when Lisa was talking earlier, she was talking about the journey you've been on overall, and that sounds like it's as knowledge and information has progressed, and we've moved along that from starting to look at kind of trying to offset things to trying to actually get to a point where we're reducing what we're doing and really being those custodians, guardians of the landscape and the land that we're working in. But maybe in that construction space, which I think is my particular interest around all of these things. But Lisa, do you want to give us a bit of a short spiel on what you've been doing in that space?
Yes, Simon mentioned our 2030 strategy. And so, as part of developing that strategy, our colleague Alice Greenhill, she did a great strategic scan of environment trends that matter the most. And from that, they then landed on those 3 environment pillar components that now are featured in our strategy: beyond zero carbon, embracing the circular economy, and healthy ecosystems. So on circular economy, we started that work with a material flows analysis and a life cycle assessment. So basically, we looked at how much stuff, in inverted commas, is flowing where and what's the carbon impact of that stuff. So the stuff that we looked at was water and nutrients and materials. And of course, no surprises here. Water is by far the largest in terms of tonnage that is flowing around Yarra Valley Water, followed by nutrients, and then materials. So you could assume, oh, if you want to progress the circular economy, let's just recycle all of the water and we stars in circular economy. But of course, there is lots of other drivers and policy, community readiness, etc., technology that stop us from doing that. So the next biggest thing for us really to focus on is looking at the materials. And there it was quite surprising to see that the embedment materials that we use in construction, that they have a quite a considerable larger carbon footprint than what we anticipated them to have. So now we looking at what we can do in that space to reduce the carbon footprint from construction projects. We've since done 2 more assessments, one bottom up and one top down assessments of our projects. So with the bottom up assessment, we looked at 10 projects really in detail to understand if we tweak the existing projects that were already quite advanced in their planning, and more on that in a moment. So that were quite advanced, if we just use different construction processes and different lower impact materials, what are the carbon footprint reductions that can be achieved? And we found that yes, there is anything between 8 and 15% of carbon reductions that can be achieved just by tweaking them at the very end in how we deliver them and what materials we choose. We also looked at in a more top-down process all of the projects of the next pricing period that we are delivering, and there is an average of around 40,000 tons of carbon per year that we are producing as a result of the construction that we're doing. We're not saying, let's bring it down to zero, not construct anymore. That would be absolute fail. We need to construct, but let's do it in a way that we consciously make decisions about how we construct and where and in what ways to further reduce that carbon footprint.
Yeah, and especially where you're keeping your assets moving, you're keeping them going, but you're also trying to balance off trying to build less and use what you're already doing. And I think the graph you referred to is one that we use quite a lot in terms of that carbon hierarchy. It comes up in every conversation we're having, doesn't it, John?
Yeah, it comes up all the time, that graph has 2080, and you can see where you can make the biggest changes. So yeah, it's good.
It's easy to push through it in a once-off project and go, hurrah, we've saved a lot of carbon in this construction project, but how do you embed it in the ongoing process and in every project? That's really the challenge that we're currently working on how we can make it part of BAU.
I think that applies to the whole of the fields that we work in here too. It's like when we look at the impact that we can have, we can talk about it in isolation about our role in a specific project, but we'll get much more impact if we can influence the way that the organization thinks, where we can influence the culture, where we can um, bring people along the journey with us so that they begin to think in these terms, and it becomes another aspect to decision making. And once you got a little bit more consideration to these to emissions and what it means across the the span of operations, not just from construction, but from our operations, from those of the people who work with us, so our maintenance contractors, all the way through to our customers and what they're doing with the products that we supply them with. It's once you start to embed the thinking of emissions reductions and ways to do things better for the environment across all of those functions and have other people make better decisions. That's the biggest impact that I think that we can have.
I would love to see, really, Simon. At the moment, often you talk about this triangle of cost and quality and time. I think it would be very neat if it was kind of a pyramid or something with a fourth dot, which is carbon, that you really think about those four things at once.
You've obviously come a long way in quite a short period of time, and it's sometimes these things are driven by the sort of a top-down approach. A leadership team decides that this is the right way to go. Sometimes it's from sort of more of a grassroots level. And I just wonder, from a Yarra Valley Water perspective, what are some of these drivers from you or your organisation? What's driving you to make these changes going forwards?
I've been at Yarra Valley Water for 7 years now. When I came in, there was essentially, they identified that there was a skills gap, and that's the role that I've come in to look at energy and emissions more broadly. We have a very supportive leadership team and managing director and board, and they essentially put the challenge to us to say, what do you think we could do? And so and that's quite an exciting place to be. So we've gone away and we'd had a look at how we operate and what we're currently doing, and tried to break it down into each area where we think we could improve. From there, we developed quite an ambitious strategy, and that strategy has driven some pretty ambitious targets and some plans to achieve those targets, and we put those back through to management, and then it goes to board through board strategy days, and they've endorsed it. So essentially, I think that the freedom that they've given us to go and really see what we can do in this space, and to challenge us to pull it together with practicable action plans and ways that we can actually deliver on this within the framing of what is our role in society, what is the constraints that we have to operate into, so the budgets to do things. The business is really, really good at tapping in to people's desire to want to do better, but in a responsible manner.
Yeah, I think there was, given that the themes, they were set in a 2030 strategy. So to me, it feels a bit like they're pointing us to the mountain they want us to climb. But then how we get up there, that's really up to us to determine that and find the best route and find the best equipment and find the best crews that we need to take along on that journey.
One of the things that we often discuss in this space is quite a change, whether it's different materials or different ways of doing things. People might have been working in the industry for 20 years and suddenly we got to change to doing something different. And so, is that something that you've been struggling with in your discussions, or how have you got over that?
People want to change for the better, but sometimes there are little barriers that get in the way, that this is the way that I've always done it, or this is the way that it's done. And so challenging those at times is key. But I find, and we've found on our journey too, that you can't really walk in to tell somebody who's done something for 20 years that what they're doing is wrong. That is a way to instantly get a backup and a barrier to implementation. But if you take them through and you show them data and you show them, here is what you're doing at the moment, and you're doing a fantastic job, but your consideration may be on a single focus of an outcome. Have you considered bringing in this additional aspect into how you do things? Now, a perfect example there is in our treatment plants. We take wastewater and we treat it to a quality that has to be returned to the environment. And we have guidelines from the EPA on how we do that. So historically, the incentive for the operators was, let's clean the water as clean as we can get it before we put it back into the into the environment and discharge it. Now that didn't really give energy a consideration into that mix. So once you start showing the operators, go, well, energy's starting to cost more, so it's impacting our operating cost. And so once we started to bring those sort of considerations into the operators to say, the energy that you're buying is more expensive, it's quite dirty, and you're cleaning the water really, to the bottom of the scale. What happens if we make some adjustments to become a bit more efficient? Is there any trade-off in that space? Can you meet your objectives, but be more efficient in the way that you do it? And the challenge then is put to the operator. And once they've got the challenge and they have the knowledge and they can see the data, then a lot of those changes are happening organically, just by the nature of people really want to do the best job that they can.
Regarding the Scope 3 carbon in construction, I feel like it's a very similar journey. Some of that way is still ahead of us. Again, as you said, Simon, saying, oh, you've done it in the wrong way, and this is how it must be done from now on, is absolutely the wrong approach. But we are working with the contractors to understand, what materials are already available on the market, which ones have already the ticks from the technical standards teams that they are suitable for certain consumption, for certain users, and then looking at to encourage to use those materials more in the construction process. And same with the designs of projects. Now we are moving towards working more closely with the design people to highlight, that how a small shift in a design can lead to a much lower carbon outcome.
I've got an example there actually of, I touched on electric motors previously. So last year we spent $3.5 million running electric motors. We've recently run a workshop with one of our suppliers out here. So ABB came out to meet with our operators and designers and the like, and to demonstrate technological improvements in motors and higher efficiency motors and drives to support high efficiency motors. Through the course of that, we're in the delivery phase of a project, which is upgrading a very large pump. It had a 500 kilowatt motor, and they'd specified an IE3 motor in the design. Afterwards, it got caught by the people who came to the workshop, and they went and engaged with the people who were doing the tender, and they up-spec'd the motor to an IE4 motor. It cost an extra, I think, $3,000 in capital and an extra 3-week lead time on a $250,000 project, and which was a 39 or 40-week project. But the benefits of just speccing that one motor turns into NPV positive over the 20-year lifespan of $55,000. So by that one small little change, we've embedded a cost saving in the business over the next 20 years of, a couple $100 a month at that site. So that's a tangible sort of example of how we're trying to influence the business to make better decisions, to be a bit more efficient, to look at a total cost of ownership or life cycle cost model as opposed to a capital cost delivery model.
One thing I've kind of picked up on earlier in the conversation was around the fact that you've brought so many of your stakeholders and your supply chain on board with this journey, and that's absolutely exemplified by the story you've just told us, Simon. But I'm wondering, in terms of the cultural changes, and we've touched on them already, but those cultural changes within that supply chain as well as within the organisation, have you found that it's been different with both? Or have you found that it's been generally the same across the board?
I think within Yarra Valley Water, because we've got the 2030 strategy that has a very strong environment ambitions, it's been probably easier to engage with the people also because they have been exposed to that messaging more frequently. Having said that, there is also other drivers and pressures on project managers. So saying that everyone is equally excited about these things would be an exaggeration. So there is, some project managers that are more ambitious and happy to do some extra work to accommodate for certain things. Absolutely, that's just part of it. What is helping, unfortunately, is also the realization increasingly that climate change is here, is now, it's starting to bite. It's increasingly so. So I think the more people are really feeling climate change, the more they'll be willing to go a bit extra to help mitigate it.
One example that I've got in that space is that our maintenance contractors, Ventia, they often run vehicles that have Yarra Valley Water branding on them. We're in the process at the moment of engaging with Ventia. They've got ambitions to transition to EVs. So we're looking to work with their management and leaders to try and incentivize the uptake of EVs that will transition from diesel fuel to renewable electricity with all the cost saving benefits and carbon benefits as well. And we're looking to deploy EV chargers at a number of our sites that will enable our maintenance contractors to have more EVs in their fleet.
That's fantastic, isn't it? I like that sort of enabling thinking more in the round about everyone involved in your business, how they can all sort of benefit from this.
One thing I'd like to point out is that a lot of the times when we're making these decisions and we're making these changes, it's a win-win scenario. It's not really win-lose. So there's not very many times when it's we win, you lose. It's when we do it with our suppliers or when we do it with our contractors or with people, there's benefits for all who are involved.
Yeah, so any key takeaways from what you've been doing, the work you've done so far, particularly if, say, there was some of our colleagues from the New Zealand water industry sitting in the room with us, yeah, what would you be saying to them?
Be brave.
Have a strategic approach.
Develop the strategies, take them to your leaders, or if you've got leaders there, challenge your people to see the mountain and to work out how to climb it. It all comes from just being aware in this space and really drilling down to see what you can achieve rather than what you need to achieve. It in Australia or in Victoria, well, here's a perfect example. So we went with the whole of the industry to develop our statement of obligations for emissions reductions. So Yarra Valley Water is obligated to be net zero in 2030, but we've accelerated that, and we're looking to do that by 2025. So it's an example of not just doing what you need to do, but really challenging yourself to see what you can achieve.
And anything you'd do differently if you'd started again, if you sort of were looking back a few years, what would you say? Oh, I could have got here faster, or I would have done this differently.
I think for the most part we've done pretty well in forming a strategy, getting acceptance of it across the business, driving for it, leading from the front, not being told we have to do something, but going out there and doing it because it's the right thing to do. So all in all, I think we've come a long way. We know where we're going. We're on our path to get there. And would I change much? Not really.
We're not on the top of the mountain yet, so there is definitely more to go.
In the scale of world emissions, we're a speck of sand on Bondi Beach, but in terms of actually doing something about it, I think that we're right at the forefront. So hope that what we're doing resonates with others and that they can run with it too.
Yeah, we all have to do our own bit, don't we? You can only do the work where you're in control, and inspiring others is fantastic as well. Thank you both. It's been great having you on the podcast, Lisa and Simon, hearing about what's been going on at Yarra Valley Water, all the work you've been doing in relation to climate change. Thanks to everyone for listening in to this podcast. Hopefully this brings together some of what we've been hearing from both within New Zealand and outside with Yarra Valley Water and Anglian Water. Next, we're really going global. So we're going to be talking about COP28. So that's coming up early next month. So listen out. We're hoping to do a preview to COP28 and then a review. So listen out for that one. And always, if you've got any feedback, please send it to us at Water New Zealand. It's best by email to media@waternz.org.nz. Thanks very much and see you next time.